Welcome to We Got Balls, real, raw, masculine sex talk with Chris Inman and Scott Cohn. Chris and Scott both work with men who want to leave their unwanted sexual struggles in the past. They are willing to do whatever it takes to help men get curious about what drives their compulsive sexual behavior. With that said, here we go.
Hey guys, welcome back. We are here on We Got Balls, and we're here for a very exciting and very titillating, you like that word, Scott? Titillating conversation.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. I try. And so we're going to be talking today about fantasy. And Scott, when I was young, I was a huge fan of fantasy books. I read Lord of the Rings, I read Narnia, I read the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, and I would just isolate myself and just be totally alone with these worlds, these ideas of different people going on grand adventures and experiencing such connection and fulfillment and just, even empathizing with the struggles that they went through in all these processes. And I just fell in love. In fact, I fell so deeply in love with fantasy, in a literary sense, that I wrote my senior high school research paper on a fantasy book. I mean, I'm just a geek because I love fantasy. But there was a point in this where all my love for fantasy just wasn't enough. And I think probably around, 14, 15, 16, my love for literary fantasy began to wane and my love for sexual fantasy began to rise up. And it was all about the experiences that I could have with other girls and the things that I could imagine we would be doing and the connection that would offer. Because in my life, I was desperately looking for anyone to connect with. Is that something that sounds familiar to you?
Well, can you see what's behind me? I've got Spider-Man and Superman. And,
yes.
So, you've got me thinking about this because when I was growing up, so I remember my grandma gave me, my grandma lived in Iowa and we lived in Denver, Colorado. And so we would drive the long drive to see her. And one time on the way back, she gave me some comic books to read. I think I was maybe in third or fourth grade. And boom, I was hooked immediately on the superhero genre. And the two areas where I was just fascinated as a kid were superheroes and monsters. Mm-hmm. So what do monsters and superheroes have in common? They're powerful. Yep. And I felt really powerless in my home at times in my relationship with my mom and dad. And so I remember, this may sound really freaky weird to you, but I remember when I was going into puberty, I would sometimes fantasize about becoming a werewolf and having this power. And it was kind of sexually arousing, actually. And
there's nothing weird about that. I'm the guy that used to have dreams about naked Care Bears. So
that's true. But and I was just kind of pondering this the other day as I was preparing for this episode, knowing we were talking about fantasies. Is like, what was I looking for in fantasizing about being aware? What was I saying about myself? And I think there was something about me that felt kind of animalistic and out of control and raging. And I was afraid that I would do this, damn it, because werewolves are always these really lovable guys that end up killing their friends. They eat their friends.
Right. And
that's how I saw myself.
Yeah.
Is a really kind of, I'm a lovable guy, but man, there's a part of me that when it goes off wild, it becomes wild and dangerous to my friends. And that's really how I saw myself, even as a kid. And so it's interesting to think about the role that just normal kind of imagination and fantasy, whether it's superheroes and monsters or whether it's Lord of the Rings or the science fiction stuff that you were into as well, how that then morphs into our sex lives as we go into puberty and we start to, for you and me, we kind of had to do fantasy the old fashioned way, which was to imagine it.
Exactly.
Right?
Until the internet.
Until the internet came along. And now frankly, the younger generation, they're lazy fantasizers because
I mean, let's just call them out. Millennials and Gen Zs, you had it handed to you. It was in your pocket from the time. So here we are. Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn, dude. Get off my lawn.
You have a lack of imagination.
But I will say that as I began to, embody the fantasies that were offered to me online, I became a lazy fantasizer too. Is I just settled for what I could pull up. I mean, there was so much more elaborate creativity in my own process when I was younger that now, I mean, I'm in my 40s. I don't have to work that hard. People are offering me ridiculous fantasies, and I can either choose to, consume them or not. So I think we're all in the same boat, whether we start at different places or not. But the biggest thing for me with fantasy is the fact that I don't have to share it with anybody. We did a training together probably a couple years ago, and one of the pieces of that training was to write a fantasy story. And holy shit, Scott, I wrote that story and it scared the hell out of me because it was a real time. If I was going to create a fantasy in the moment that would just sweep me off my feet and make me abandon everything, every part of my identity and my values, and just pour headlong into an addictive process, that was the fantasy that I wrote.
So, this is a process that we both use in our recovery process, right? We start to go into arousal structures and what turns you on. One of the exercises we give guys is write out your 3 most arousing fantasies in detail, like they're movie scripts. And dude, that's triggering. I got to tell you, as a guy helping other dudes, when I listen to that, sometimes it's triggering just to listen to it, let alone write it out. And it's embarrassing, because you're revealing the inner secrets of your heart. And that's one of the things I think that's really interesting about fantasy, particularly in an internet world. And I want to refer to an experiment that was done in 1973. It'd be illegal today. It's really considered unethical. But the guys who wrote A Billion Wicked Thoughts, which is this fascinating book on what the internet tells us about sexual desire, talk about this experiment. And I want to read it so I get the details right, but it's really fascinating. So in 1973, a psychologist named Kenneth Gergen at Swarthmore College conducted another social psychology experiment that would probably fail to get approved in today's ethics boards. And he asked, what do people do under conditions of extreme anonymity? So what he did is he recruited 5 males and 5 female undergrads, and they went into this room, and the room became completely dark.
Really?
So you've got 10 strangers. They didn't know each other. And now
it sounds like a Netflix show already, dude.
I'm sure somebody's producing it already.
Yeah.
So once they turned off the lights at the end of the experiment, the subjects left the room one at a time. So they didn't know each other after the experiment. But what made the experiment so interesting is the room being pitch dark, and the subjects couldn't see one another, so they didn't know one another, and they would not learn one another's identity after the experiment. In other words, they experienced complete and total anonymity, just like the internet, just like you sitting down at your computer, firing up the porn. Yep. So what did these anonymous strangers do? At first they talked, the conversation soon slacked off. Then the touch began.
Yes.
Almost 90% of subjects touch someone else on purpose. Now remember, these are complete strangers and they're going up touching each other.
Yeah.
More than half of the subjects hugged someone. A third of the subjects ended up kissing. One young man kissed 5 different girls. As I was sitting, Beth came up and we started to play touchy face and touch body and started to neck. We expressed it as showing love to each other. We decided to pass our love on and share it with other people. So we split up and Lori took her place. Hidden by anonymity, the participants freely expressed their desires. One man even offered to pay Gergen to go back into the room.
Oh, wow.
Almost 80% of the men and women reported feeling sexual excitement.
Yeah.
Now, the internet does this experiment every day on a much, much larger scale, right?
Exactly.
And it's interesting what our internet searches about what turns us on under the cover of anonymity, where we can be completely free to express our desires, really is all about. Because when prior to the internet, again, you're either using your imagination, or if you're really bold, you're going to a dirty bookstore and buying books or magazines, or you're going to an X-rated theater and sitting there. So very few people did that before the internet. But now everybody's got that same experience available to them with a click of a mouse. And what is it revealing? So the interesting thing is that you would think that, given the number of human beings in the world and the breadth of the internet and the idea that there's basically a porn for everything, that our sexual interests would be all over the place. And in fact, 35 categories comprise 90% of all sexual searches. Just 35.
So let's just go back to what you were saying in that dark room, is when you turn off the lights and you limit the consequences. I mean, now that they're not seeing each other again after this experience. What ultimately I'm looking for in fantasy is a ideal human experience for me.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be as intimate and as connected with another human being. I mean, they're not judging the looks of these people in that dark room. They're just touching and kissing and becoming aroused and experimenting and finding excitement in the variability of the experience, which it sounds like to me, it's like that dark room in some sense is better than the internet because it's real people. And yet we don't have dark rooms to go to. And like you said, it would probably be illegal to do that again today anyways.
Well, we do have dark rooms, Chris, because our entire life is a dark room where we're groping to find our way. That is literally what our lives are like. So think about it.
Yes.
Think about it. If you think about what really drives us as human beings, it's I think, two fundamental things based on this idea of it's not good for the man to be alone. Mm-hmm. We're driven by a sense of social connection. I want to connect with you. I want to connect with others. I want them to connect with me. And I need comfort because my life is a dark room where I am just groping to find my way. I don't know where I'm going. Yeah. I don't know what's up ahead. I don't know who's even in the room with me.
Right.
And that makes me afraid.
Yes. Yes.
And when I'm afraid, I need comfort and I need somebody else to touch me.
Yes.
So take that metaphor from this experiment and stick it in your bedroom late at night, which is when most guys are using porn, in the dark, with their pants pulled down, touching their penis while they're masturbating, looking at a scene on a video screen.
Yep.
It's no different.
Yeah.
And
you're right.
Why is that arousing? Because when I'm afraid and I feel alone and I don't know my way, when somebody reaches out and touches me, it makes me come alive.
Mm-hmm. And there's no innuendo, in that at all. It literally is. Everything is connected to that human experience of I want to feel alive.
Yep.
I want to feel seen, known, loved. I want to feel soothed and safe. I want to feel like people are going to be with me no matter what. And what's in our day and age, what's the only guaranteed way to approximate that experience? And that's virtual porn, virtual sexuality, virtual connection.
And, this goes back to the idea of attachment. Like, yes. We haven't really talked about that much yet in the podcast, but fundamental to how we experience life as human beings is this idea that we're born into a family where a mother and a father are caregivers. And for those first formative years of our life, probably the first 5 years of our life are the most formative. The first thing that happens to us is we're touched. We come out of the womb and we're touched. Yep. And we hear sounds and we smell. And so our sensory life begins to fire on all cylinders, and we begin to form this sense of who we are as a human being, as an individual, our identity. Yep. And yet it's so critical, the role that our mother and our father plays in that. But if
Yeah. So ideally, what you're saying is if those sounds, if those sensory experiences are secure, which means I can depend on them, they happen with regularity, they're not harmful or painful in any way, then I can begin to develop and grow to where fantasy, while it may be entertaining, is not a dependency for me. I
That's
don't
right.
need to escape into something else. But when they're insecure, when I can't depend on those experiences, when mom is not there to calm or dad brings his energy instead of to love and comfort and provide security, but brings anger in the environment, then I'm looking for something else, something outside my experience to substitute to imitate that experience of security, which
That's right.
is what we call insecure attachment. And we operate out of that in a number of different ways, right?
And the research is showing that insecure attachment is growing as a percentage of the population. It used to be 50% of the people were insecurely attached and 50% of the people were securely attached, at least in the United States. That figure is probably now 65% insecurely attached in the most recent research. What's happening is, as more and more families are experiencing the fracturing of divorce and single parent homes,
and cell phone culture,
and less, lots of friends online, but not a lot of real friends in reality. And so we're becoming more and more isolated as individuals in the culture, both in our families and just in other social connections. And this role that pornography plays in our lives is it comes into those vacancies in our heart, and it gives us, at least temporarily, a sense of connection and a sense of comfort and a sense of care in the midst of that disconnection that we're experiencing in reality. So it's artificial, it's virtual connection, but it's better than no connection.
Correct. And I want to make a point there, Scott, because I think a lot of times, and if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, my problem is I look at porn and I want to stop. Maybe rather than being ashamed and shutting down that behavior as bad or evil or wicked or immoral, and it's going to send you to hell or it's going to ruin your life, maybe it needs to be given the credence that it did exactly what you just said, Scott, which is it saved me for a season. I didn't have it. I found something to substitute in my life that would work. But the reality is it's not working anymore. This fantastical way of connecting is just not working anymore.
Go back to the metaphor we started with. If you feel like you've been thrown into a dark room and you're groping around for a sense of connection and meaning in your life, and there's nobody in your home to give it to you, we're not pro porn. We're not telling you to go watch porn because it's a great solution, because ultimately it ends up leaving you high and dry. But can you just honor the role that it plays in your life in giving you, for a time, a sense of connection and a sense of comfort when you're growing up in an emotional desert of a home?
Yep. So let's get clear, Scott, and let's let everybody know, when we're talking about fantasy, what is it and why is it important to recognize its significance, both in how I've struggled and also how I can heal?
So let's look at where we started, which was our fantasies around comic books and monsters and fantasy characters. What roles were those playing in our lives? They were helping us imagine a different reality than the one we were experiencing growing up. A place where, instead of being bullied by other boys, or, maybe my dad, being a little rough with me in terms of discipline at times, I imagined a scenario where I was the powerful one and I was the one in charge. You imagine places where you could escape and, you were the hero of the story, right?
Have adventures, be with friends, and feel connected. Absolutely.
So that's the general role of fantasy. It's a way to help us kind of cope with the difficulties we're going through in lives. It's very much like our dreams in that sense. It helps us process the challenges that we're going through relationally and individually, and kind of make resolution come about in our imagination. So what is the role of sexual fantasy? It's no different, right? It just takes those relational ruptures and it eroticizes them, because in a lot of our relational experiences, they create a lot of pain. When I feel like my mom and dad are rejecting me, or they're neglecting me in some way, or I've been abandoned, or I've been treated really harshly and nobody cares for my emotions, I'm not allowed to have emotions, or I'm not allowed to have desires. And those things aren't honored in my life. And I start entering puberty and discover the power of orgasm. Wow. I mean, that is an amazing jolt of pleasure that I can use to counteract the pain that I'm having in my reality. And so combining that with stories or a narrative that helps me imagine a scenario when instead of my mom ignoring me, this voluptuous teenager is coming on to me and wanting to perform oral sex on me and giving me this amazing pleasure and acceptance. Wow. That helps correct both. I'm using my body and my mind to regulate my emotions, my distress. So that's the role.
So that powerful place, that amplification of desire, of wanting to connect, wanting to experience something that's securely human. I mean, I think it's important to recognize that, when we go from childhood fantasy to sexual fantasy, there's not a lot of shame in childhood fantasy. That's what you're supposed to do. You got comic book stuff behind you right now. Nobody's saying, Scott, you're such a little kid. Why do you, if I go back and pick up my copy of the Silmarillion and read it, nobody's like, you're such a baby. But if I am engaging in sexual fantasy, there's all kinds of internal and externalized shameful factors around that, which really creates the compulsion, the secrecy, the habits that happen out of that.
Yeah, so that's one of the purposes of our podcast, is to invite men to a place where they can start to look at their sexual fantasies and their porn themes. What turns you on in porn? What do you look for? What do you type in the search engines? And what do you end up watching? In a very kind and curious way, because really all it's trying to do is bring that same kind of sense of connection and soothing to you in your current life. Like you are a person that hasn't learned to do life where you can self-soothe, or you can pick yourself up and stimulate yourself when you're feeling depressed or really shameful. And that we call that self-regulation. People that have a lot of childhood adverse experiences and trauma in their lives cannot self-regulate. And so what they do is they auto-regulate. They masturbate early, and that masturbation turns into sexual fantasy or pornography use. And that is how we learn to cope with distressing feelings, both in our bodies and our emotions and our thoughts.
And they start very young. So those habits are there before I understand what I'm doing, and the power of it and the connection with it makes it compulsive, makes it shameful. Yes, I'm trying to hide it. I'm not flaunting it in public, but I continue to do it year after year after year because it works, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, have you had an orgasm lately? Because
yeah, they're nice. I think thumbs up on the orgasms. Yeah.
I think, once you discover that magic power in your body, you're like, oh, I'm going to do this again. Yeah. And it just becomes a really default way of coping with unpleasant feelings and sensations. And so look at it for what it is. Instead of feeling a lot of shame about it, look at the role that it's playing in helping you cope with an unmanageable life. That's the way to kind of find your way out of it, because our premise is that your fantasies are actually trying to help you in some way. Your porn usage and your masturbation habit, they're trying to bring soothing and a sense of connection to you in some way. So be curious about that. Like, when do I get triggered to want to use that?
Yeah.
And view it, instead of viewing it as sexual temptation. No doubt it's sexual temptation. But view it as a form of soothing yourself.
Yes.
That's kind of self-sabotaging at the same time. Because have you ever felt, after you've masturbated to porn, have you ever felt like, man, that was the greatest sexual experience I've ever had. Let's go back and do that again.
No. In fact, I think the data, the research is even, masturbation itself is somewhere between 40 to 60% as effective as orgasm in a committed, connected human relationship. So really what I'm giving myself,
bringing that sense of connection and soothing.
Exactly. Well, right. even in the endorphin release, I'll just say this, and, masturbation for me is kind of like, okay, I did that, now it's over, versus having a connection with someone else is that connection really is far more powerful and far more integrating, because what you're saying is absolutely true. When I get done, when I was acting out and masturbating to porn, I get done with that, it was kind of like, let me clean up. And it was more a relief than it was a true excitement, engagement, connection.
Yeah, there's nobody that you're bonding with. With the release of vasopressin in the male brain, when an orgasm occurs, it's intended to bond you. So if you're masturbating, there's a big hole there. Even if you're looking, you'll bond visually with what you're looking at, but there's no touch other than your own hand on your penis. There's nothing else that you're bonding with. So it's kind of a hole. So
and there's a sense of kind of like at the end, you're kind of like, I'm a little, the shame creeps back in very, very quickly after the fact. So,
right. But the invitation is, instead of getting down on yourself and shaming yourself and trying to change with a lot of self-contempt, which is how we try to manage that behavior. I'm never going to do that again. A good Christian would never do that. I'm a bad Christian. I've got to stop doing this to be a good Christian. That's not the way to get out of that situation. No. Look at it for what it is. It's a form of self-soothing. It's just self-sabotaging. It's not moving you forward in life. It's not helping you grow relationally. It's not helping you grow emotionally as a man. It keeps you stunted kind of as a 12-year-old. So how do you want to manage your life then? Think about ways that you can bring soothing to yourself, your body and your mind that don't involve sexuality at the moment. So that's, one practical thing there. But back to fantasy.
Well, Scott, I hate to put an end to the conversation, but this is where we're looking off the canyon of fantasy right now, because fantasy is huge. It's a topic you're going to hear over and over and over again. And so the invitation that I want to say is, listen, as you're listening to what we're talking about and things are swirling around in your head, take note, because what your fantasies are really pointing to is what you're really wanting in your human experience, how you really want to connect. Now, how you can connect to those things. I mean, Scott mentioned some non-sexual connections, some experiences that may bring you pleasure and intimacy. And it may, at this point in time in your life, may seem, I have nothing. All I've got is porn. All I've got is orgasm. But the reality is that's just not true. There are opportunities that you're not seeing right now that your story, telling your story and engaging with the narrative that got you to this point so far, will help you trace back and see what are the fantasies really trying to say to you, because every single fantasy that we have has a message. It points to a deeper truth that me, uniquely as a human being, longs to connect in. And so I think we want to keep pushing forward into that place and keep bringing up fantasy, and we'll do multiple episodes on this front and talk about various aspects. But we wanted to do this introduction just to kind of give you a jumping off point, because fantasy is super, super, super powerful in this exploration of sexual arousal. So any last thoughts as we close out, Scott?
Just an invitation for guys to go back to that metaphor at the beginning. I think we both really sensed the power of that as we were talking about it. Where in your life do you feel like you're in that dark room, groping for a sense of connection and comfort in the midst of a lot of fear and uncertainty? And how are your sexual fantasies or your porn themes helping you manage that right now? And what do you want to do differently? What are they trying to tell you? And how would you like to make some changes? So that's our invitation. Thanks for being with us, guys. As always, we'll see you next time on We Got Balls.
Take care, guys. Talk to you soon.
Don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. You can connect with Chris at pornfreemasculinity.com and with Scott at successfulmen.com.